Have you ever wondered why some women stay etched in a man's memory long after she's gone? Not because she clung, begged, or explained, but precisely because she didn't. Some women don't just pass through a man's life, they haunt it. Not as ghosts of regret, but as echoes of something sacred and ungraspable. These women move with quiet power. They don't scream, they don't chase, they don't collapse into emotion to be understood. They become myth, not through performance, but through presence. Jung would say, she is an anima projection, shattered, a mirror to his unlived soul, withdrawn before he could claim it. And that is the beginning of obsession. A man cannot forget what he cannot fully possess, and he cannot possess what reflects his own unconscious back to him. She may have only shared brief moments with him, a glance that didn't linger, a silence that wasn't filled, a refusal to explain her sadness. But in each of these moments, she awakens something ancient within him, something he's been running from. Because the truly feminine, the archetypal feminine, does not soothe his ego. She fractures it. She becomes the crack through which his illusions begin to fall apart. And though he may not understand why, her presence remains like a scent on the skin of his psyche. He'll remember how she didn't need to be chosen, how she didn't wait for him to see her. He'll remember that she could laugh without needing approval, that her joy didn't come from being desired, but from the deep wellspring of being herself. He'll replay the moment she walked away, not with bitterness, but with a calm that pierced him more than any insult ever could. You see, the modern man, raised on conquest, conditioned to see love as a transaction, is deeply unprepared for the woman who has made peace with her solitude. She triggers his deepest fear, that love is not something to conquer, but something to become worthy of. He may call her confusing, cold, emotionally distant, but what he's truly feeling is the absence of control. She is not emotionally distant, she is emotionally sovereign. And for a man who has only known validation through dominance, her self-possession feels like exile. Jung spoke of the anima, the inner feminine within every man, a wild, fluid presence that represents his emotional soul, his capacity to feel, to love, to connect beyond ego. When a woman embodies that anima, without collapsing into need, without offering herself as a savior, she unconsciously calls this part of him forward. And if he is not ready, he runs. But he doesn't forget, because running is not erasure. It is delay, and the soul keeps score. He may date other women, even marry, but in the chambers of his deeper psyche, there will always be a shadowed room where she lives. The woman who said nothing when she could have said everything. The woman who didn't try to fix him when he broke. The woman who loved herself more than she needed to be loved by him. And so he'll come back, perhaps in memory, perhaps in message, not for closure, but to confirm that what he saw in her wasn't a dream, that someone like her exists, that someone like her lived without him and still bloomed. But by then, she's already far away. Not in distance, but in vibration. She has continued. She has deepened. And he, still circling the same questions, will ache, not because she hurt him, but because she showed him what he never claimed within himself. This is the feminine that haunts. Not the girl who waits, not the woman who begs, but the one who chose wholeness over romance, the one who saw him clearly and still let him go.
She is the silence after chaos, the eye of the storm that never broke. She is not memorable because of what she gave, but because of what she refused to surrender. A man may forget the woman who made herself small for his comfort, but he will never forget the one who stayed large when he tried to shrink her. There is something irrevocably haunting about a woman who does not collapse when left alone. Her stillness feels like a mirror to the storm he hides inside. And that is where the torment begins. Not because she wounded him, but because she awakened a hunger he never knew he had, to be seen without being needed, to be loved without being controlled. In the depths of Jungian thought, this woman is not just a person, she is an archetype. She embodies the unknowable Anima, the muse that lives beyond reach. She evokes what the Stoics feared and revered in the same breath, the inner surrender that comes when ego no longer rules the mind. Seneca would say, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." But what of the suffering that imagination cannot silence? What of the woman who lives not in his life, but in the undercurrent of his dreams? He'll remember the day she didn't reply. Not out of bitterness, but because her energy no longer lingered where it wasn't met. He'll remember the way she made space, not for him, but for herself. And in that space, he'll feel the aching absence of a connection he once took for granted. You, the woman listening, may have felt this pull before. The moment when you could feel his soul reaching back for you long after his body was gone. And still, you said nothing. You chose not to return. Not to punish him, but because you had tasted something sweeter than being wanted, your own self-respect. This is where the feminine rises not through seduction, but through spiritual defiance. She becomes the catalyst of his transformation or his descent. Because the man who is not ready to meet himself will always misinterpret the woman who has. Jung would say that projections are the starting point of all relationships. A man does not love a woman, he loves what she represents within him. But when that projection cracks, when he begins to see her as she truly is, complex and whole and unapologetic, he faces a choice: evolve or retreat. The women who haunt do not offer themselves as saviors. They are thresholds, portals. You either rise through them or retreat into the past. When she left, she didn't slam the door, she didn't make a scene, she simply stopped showing up where she wasn't truly seen. And he felt it, not just in his mind, but in his bones. Because energy doesn't lie, and a man who loses a woman rooted in her own soul knows on a level beyond logic that something sacred has left his life. He may not say it aloud. His pride will clench its teeth. His ego will fabricate stories. But at night, when the noise of the world quiets and only the truth echoes through, he will remember. Not the texts, not the kisses, but the essence. The way she stood still when he pushed. The way she smiled with eyes full of sadness and said, "It's okay." The way she walked away as if the world was still hers to hold. Because it is. And that knowing, that unshakable feminine knowing, becomes the very thing he cannot replace. He may try, he may seek her in others, but imitation is not embodiment. He will chase the feeling, not the form. And every time he finds a woman who demands what she hasn't earned, who fears being alone, who molds herself for his approval, he'll remember the one who didn't.
It is the absence of need that becomes unforgettable. Not coldness, not detachment, but a sacred indifference born from wholeness. A woman who does not need love to feel alive, but chooses it when it aligns with her truth. That is the one a man remembers when his hands are full of someone else's body, but his mind is drifting toward a past he never understood. There is no wrath like the silence of a woman who sees everything and says nothing, and no loss more bitter than losing a woman who never tried to prove her worth. Because that kind of woman cannot be begged, lured, or reasoned back into your life. She does not return to familiarity. She returns
only to resonance. Carl Jung believed the unconscious is always seeking integration. That which we suppress returns in symbolic form, in dreams, in obsession, in regret. And so the woman who triggered a man's awakening becomes a living archetype within him, a phantom of possibility, not because she clings, but because she disappeared with dignity. When a man remembers her, it is not only her voice or scent he recalls. It is how he felt in her presence, not inflated, not admired, not superior, but seen, completely. And it terrified him. That is why he pushed her away, not because she was too much, but because she reflected too much. She became a mirror to his unlived potential. And staring into that mirror was more terrifying than losing her. Most women are taught that to be loved, they must soften, submit, explain. But the ones who are remembered, they do not explain, they embody. When she stood in her full energy, unbending and real, she became something rare. A mirror to his shadow, a catalyst to his discomfort, a disruption to his comfort zone. And still, she offered tenderness, not the kind that begs for a reply, but the kind that says, "I understand, and I release you." You, the woman watching this, you may wonder if your silence was too harsh, your detachment too cruel. But understand this: the moment you stopped chasing was the moment he started remembering. Because desire is not sustained by presence. Desire is sustained by mystery. And the greatest mystery to a man is a woman who loved herself more than she loved the potential of him. In ancient philosophy, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And in that same spirit, the woman who is most unforgettable is not the one who tries to heal a man's wounds, but the one who refused to bleed for them. He will remember her eyes, not because they begged him to stay, but because they already knew he wouldn't, and they forgave him anyway. This is the power of the feminine that haunts. She doesn't burn bridges, she lets them burn themselves. And while he may convince himself that she was just another chapter, he knows, somewhere, beneath the ego's armor, that she was the turning point, the beginning of a self he has not yet dared to meet. And so he returns, in thought, in impulse, in dreams, not to claim her, but to touch again the part of himself that only ever woke up when she was near. But she is gone now. Not vanished, not lost, just evolved. And in the quiet corners of her world, there is no bitterness, only peace. The kind that cannot be disturbed by a man who still doesn't know what he wants.
Peace is what remains when illusion dies. And illusion always dies in the face of a woman who knows herself. The haunting does not come from her absence. It comes from her completion. He does not ache because she left. He aches because she needed nothing from him on her way out. No apology, no clarity, no closure. And in that sacred refusal to demand what was never freely offered, She ascended to a realm he could no longer access. Not because he wasn't capable, but because he wasn't ready. This is the woman who lives in paradox. Soft but not submissive. Kind but not compromising. Available but never accessible without presence. She gives, but only to those who do not take. Her love was never a performance. It was a revelation. And that is precisely why it stays. Carl Jung believed that every man holds within him the image of his feminine counterpart. Not a physical woman, but the deeper energy that calls him toward integration, toward unity, toward wholeness. When he meets a woman who embodies that anima, that raw, unfiltered spiritual force, she triggers his longing to return to himself. Not just to her body or her voice, but to the version of him that only ever breathed when she was near. And so it becomes a memory, not of her, but of him. The man he almost became, before fear pulled him back into the familiar. He may see her again, not in person, but in reflections, in the eyes of someone who does not match her frequency, in the hollow echo of a conversation that lacks soul, in the quiet after shallow intimacy. She became the standard his soul remembers, even as his mind tries to forget. And you, the woman listening, you must understand this. You are not the echo of his longing. You are the origin. You were not meant to fill his void. You were meant to remind him it existed. That is why he cannot let go, because letting go of you means letting go of the self he once glimpsed in your presence, a self he has not yet earned the right to embody. But you do not wait. The woman who haunts a man's mind forever is not the one who loved him the longest, but the one who taught him that real love doesn't require permission to leave. The Stoics believed that to master desire is to find freedom. But some desires are not meant to be mastered. Some are meant to remain open wounds, not to destroy us, but to remind us of the lessons we ignored. So when he thinks of her, and he will, it won't be her body he recalls. It will be her silence, her presence, her absence, the way she made solitude feel holy, and love feel like a choice instead of a need. And that is the kind of woman who lives forever in the spaces he cannot name. He will not speak of her often, not to his friends, not to the women who come after. Because how do you explain being haunted by a soul you could not touch, a truth you could not hold, a mirror you shattered the moment it showed you who you really were? No, he will not say her name, but she will live in the pauses between his sentences, in the stillness before he falls asleep, in the look he gives when someone asks, "What's wrong?" and he answers, "Nothing." But everything is not nothing. Everything is her. And she, the woman he could not forget, she does not wait to be remembered. She continues, not as a rebellion, not as a performance, but as a quiet revolution of becoming. There is a different kind of power
in a woman who chooses not to be angry, who does not curse the man who left, nor mourn the man who returned too late. Instead, she uses the wound as a doorway, not to bitterness, but to becoming. Jung called this process individuation, the full unfolding of the self. It begins in the shadows, in heartbreak, in letting go of projections we mistook for love. She once saw him as the one, the match to her flame, the protector of her softness. But that image, it was never him. It was the echo of a deeper longing, a longing for union with herself. And when she realized that, when she saw him not as her missing piece but as her sacred lesson, she was free. This is the final stage of haunting, not the ache of memory, but the release of myth. He was not the love of her life. He was the love that awakened her life. And for that, she offers gratitude. Not attachment, not obsession, just the still, clear recognition that every soul arrives to teach us something. Some teach us what we lack, others teach us what we are, and a rare few teach us what we'll never accept again. So now, when she smiles, it is not the smile of a woman who has moved on. It is the smile of a woman who has risen, above the noise, beyond the need, into the full embrace of her feminine knowing. And what haunts him is not her presence. It's the knowing that she now lives in a realm he cannot enter, not until he too meets his shadows, not until he too integrates his fractured soul, not until he becomes the man he once pretended to be. That is the tragedy and the gift. Because sometimes the one who gets away is the one who saves us. But for her, there is no more chasing, no more proving, no more waiting for the apology that may never come. She has become her own sanctuary, and in that sacred silence, she is whole. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.